Have you ever witnessed a love so intense that it transcends all boundaries? A love where the bond between a brother and sister transforms into something society cannot accept. This is the story of Nick and Nova. They challenge societal norms, but will they be willing to sacrifice everything for their emotions? Let's see what becomes of their love story. The tale begins with Nova, a young girl, moving in with her mother, Rafaela, to the home of her mother's fiance, William. William is an affluent man and is soon going to marry Rafaela. Nova is displeased with the marriage and dislikes the idea of becoming a daughter in such a rich household. Rafaela tries to convince Nova that it's not always possible to solve problems alone, and that having a strong support system can help make life better. She also tells Nova that while it may be difficult to part ways with her boyfriend, Dan, she will make many new friends in the new place. Upon arriving at William's home, Nova is greeted warmly by him, but she does not converse with him pleasantly. Rafaela gives Nova a tour of the house, which is grand and beautiful. Nova feels uncomfortable with all the luxury, but when her mother shows her the room prepared for her, she is astonished. The room is exquisitely decorated with Nova's favorite things and colors. Rafaela explains that William had specifically designed the room for Nova. Nova eventually likes the room. Afterward, Rafaela tells Nova about Nick, who is William's son and her stepbrother. As Nova stands on the balcony, she notices a young man behind the trees, though his face is not clear. Just then, her best friend, Betty, calls her, and she walks to the kitchen to talk. Suddenly, she gets startled when she sees Nick and drops her phone. As she bends to pick it up, Nick's dog appears. In panic, Nova hides behind Nick and threatens him with a pen, saying that if he doesn't quiet his dog, she will hit him on the head. Nick jokingly tells her not to try it, or his dog might attack her. At that moment, Rafaela and William arrive. Nova tells them that Nick is nice but that she likes his dog more. Later, when Nova returns to her room, she notices that Betty is still on the phone, listening to their entire conversation. Betty asks about Nick, but Nova replies that she hasn't really looked at him closely. For dinner, they all prepare to go out. Nova wears a beautiful dress that everyone praises. On the way, Nova is lost in thoughts about her boyfriend when Nick overtakes their car. At the restaurant, Nova begins mocking Nick, but he takes it lightly. After the meal, Nick excuses himself to attend to some important work. Before leaving, he tells Nova, "Where will you run from me?" Nick's father advises him to drop Nova home and to drive carefully. During the drive, Nick speeds up, and they start arguing. In the midst of the conversation, Nova makes a disparaging comment about Nick's mother, which makes Nick stop the car and angrily drop Nova off in the middle of the road. After a while, Nova hails a passing car, and a boy named Mario gives her a lift. They start talking in the car, and during the conversation, Mario reveals he is going to a party at a villa. Nova later finds out that Mario is Nick's friend. Mario tells her that Nick is also at the same party, and Nova asks him to take her there. When they arrive, Nova sees Nick kissing one girl after another. This infuriates Nova, and she wonders if Nick had left with an excuse of work just to do this. She walks over to him, punches him hard, and angrily tells him, "You left me on a desolate road where anything could have happened to me, and now you're here having fun." She also adds, "Your father thinks you're, Mr. Perfect, but what will he think if he learns about your escapades?" Nick, in anger, threatens her to keep quiet, saying she shouldn't be interested in such things. Nova then asks him why he flirts with girls. Nick responds that the girls come to him, and during this conversation, he gets closer to Nova. She pushes him away, and Nick, undeterred, continues with his flirtations. At the party, a girl approaches Nova and tells her she is Nick's childhood friend. They converse and soon become friends. A short while later, Nick is seen kissing a girl provocatively to tease Nova. During this time, a gangster named Ronnie approaches Nova and offers her a drink. Nova takes a sip of the drink but soon begins feeling strange. Nick rushes over and shoves Ronnie to the ground, but Nova, in an attempt to tease him back, starts drinking again. In his anger, Nick knocks the drink out of her hand, warning that these boys often spike drinks with drugs to intoxicate girls. Nova starts feeling dizzy. Nick decides to take her home, but Nova continues making mischievous comments about him in the car. Nick tells her to be quiet, but she doesn't stop. Finally, they reach home. Nick carries Nova to her room and gently lays her on the bed, making sure she falls asleep. He controls himself and does nothing inappropriate. While sleeping in her intoxicated state, Nova dreams of her childhood, where her mother wakes her up and hides her from her real father, who is knocking on the door, threatening to harm both of them. In the morning, Nick is sitting at the breakfast table. When Nova asks him what happened between them last night, Nick teases her by saying, "A lot happened between us last night." This makes Nova panic. Later, Nova goes to the beach to relax, where she meets Jenna. After a while, Nick arrives with his friends to surf. While Nick is changing clothes, Nova watches him and feels a few mischievous thoughts arise in her mind. During this time, Nova learns that Nick is about to participate in a car race that night. At night, Nick arrives at the race location with his friends, where the competition against Ronnie's group is about to take place. Both teams prepare for the race, and it begins. After an exhilarating race, Nick wins once again, as he has every year. Everyone celebrates his victory. Meanwhile, Nova receives a message showing her boyfriend, Dan, kissing her best friend. Furious, Nova kisses a boy at the party to provoke Dan and starts taking pictures. Nick arrives at the scene and drives the boy away. Seeing Nova's phone, he figures out why she's doing this. Nova tells him that she only wanted to take the pictures to make her boyfriend jealous. Nick then asks her, "If I kiss you and take a picture, will you leave right now?" Nova replies affirmatively. Nick kisses her in a charming manner, and Nova takes the photo. Nick, after putting Nova in the car, says, "I'll tell my friend to drop you home." He then gets busy romancing another girl. Meanwhile, Nova sends the photo to her boyfriend and starts the car. At that moment, Ronnie arrives in a car and asks, "Nick is racing against me, but what are you doing here?" Nova replies, "I can race." The race begins, and there's a fierce competition between Nova and Ronnie. Nick is surprised and worried to see that Nova is racing in his place. In the end, Nova wins the race, and everyone rejoices. However, after losing, Ronnie angrily accuses Nick of breaking the rules by sending a girl to compete. Ronnie says, "We won, and you lost. Now you have to pay us and give up your car." Nova argues with Ronnie, but Nick tries to take her away from the scene. Ronnie insults Nova, and in anger, Nick starts beating him. A fight breaks out between both groups. Seeing this, Nova gets scared and sits down. Nick's friend comes to her aid and helps her into Nick's car. Soon, Nick joins them, and they hurry to leave. Now, the story progresses 4 days ahead, showing a scene in the morning. Nova is sleeping in her room when her mother wakes her up, telling her that William, her father, is hosting a success party today, and Nova is expected to attend. Her mother adds that Nick has been missing for the past 4 days, but since there is a party, he will likely show up on time. On the other side, we see Nick, who is spending time with his younger sister, Maggie, who is suffering from cancer. Nick spends some time with her, talking and bonding. Meanwhile, after the party ends, Nova and her parents return home. Nick couldn't make it to the party. When he got home, Nova was sitting alone, watching TV. Nick returned and sat down next to her, and they started talking. As they talked, they began kissing each other, and soon, they became increasingly tempted. Nick stopped and said, "This is wrong, and we shouldn't be doing this." Just then, Nova's mother entered the room and told Nick that he needed to apologize to her father for not attending the party. Nick left after that. The next day, Nova was washing her car when she noticed Nick watching her. To impress him, Nova began drenching herself with water, which made Nick smile. At that moment, Nova's mother brought her boyfriend Dan to introduce him to Nova. But since Nova had already seen the photos of Dan kissing her best friend, she was upset with him. When Dan tried to kiss Nova, she turned her face away. Afterward, Nova's mother took Dan back home. Meanwhile, Nick was swimming in the pool when Nova came to talk to him. Nick jokingly pulled her into the pool. A closer bond was forming between them, and every time they got close, they couldn't control themselves. Dan, who was watching from a distance, was shocked, but Nick's friends stopped him from intervening. Nova's mother called Nick, and he left. Later, Dan approached Nova and asked, "Is this the same guy whose picture you sent?" Nova didn't answer. At that moment, Nick was on his way somewhere when he ran into Ronnie. Ronnie started making inappropriate comments about Nova in front of Nick, which made Nick furious. The scene shifts, and Nick is shown at home with visible marks on his face, indicating that he had fought with Ronnie. Nick stood by the pool, looking at Nova, who was sleeping outside. He went closer and noticed a mark on her stomach. Nick started covering her stomach, but suddenly, Nova woke up and, startled, punched him, causing his nose to bleed. Nova immediately apologized and said, "I thought Dan had come and was bothering me, so I panicked." At this point, they both got close again, but suddenly, Dan showed up and saw them together. Nova quickly told Dan not to tell anyone about this and to leave the next day. The following morning, Nova's mother gave her a letter from Dan, telling her that he had left. Later, Nova and Nick went with their friends to a fight club, where Nick was scheduled to fight. Once inside the club, the two became so close that they kissed again. Being apart from each other was becoming difficult. It felt like they had become addicted to each other. Just then, two of Nick's friends arrived and saw them in this situation. One of Nick's friends tried to warn him, saying that Nova was his stepsister, and he shouldn't be doing this. Afterward, everyone entered the club, and Nick's fight was about to begin. Nova tried to stop him from fighting, as she didn't like conflicts, but Nick ignored her and got ready for the fight. Nick started winning, but Nova couldn't bear to watch and stepped outside the club. Outside the club, one of Nick's friends came over to talk to Nova and kissed her. When Nick finished the fight and came outside, he got angry upon seeing this. He shoved his friend and scolded him, telling him to leave. Nick told Nova that she should never let anyone get close to her again. However, Nova was angry at Nick for the fight and told him, "Nothing can happen between us now, so don't talk to me." After that, they both distanced themselves from each other, but internally, they missed each other a lot. A few days later, Nick's father told him that Nova's father, Jonas, who had been in prison before, had been released. Nick was surprised and said that he had heard Nova's father was dead. Nick's father explained that Nova's father had been imprisoned based on her testimony, as he had been torturing Nova and her mother, Rifla. Nick was also told that the marks on Nova's body were a result of her father's abuse. Nick's father advised him to take care of Nova because her father might try to harm them again. One day, Nova was at a party and drank too much alcohol. Meanwhile, Nick was trying to find her, calling everyone to ask about her. At the party, one of Nick's friends, in a drunken state, locked Nova in a closet. Nova gets scared when she is locked in the closet, as her cruel father used to lock her in a closet when she was a child. Nick arrives, takes Nova out of the closet, and brings her back home. After this incident, Nova is terrified and asks Nick to stay with her. Though it is difficult for him, Nick decides to stay in Nova's room. He spends the night there. The next morning, when Nick is about to go back to his room, his father sees them together. Both Nick and Nova get nervous when they see their father in this situation. Nick's father had come to inform him about his sister Maggie's illness, and that she was in the hospital, but seeing them together, he gets angry and leaves. Later, Nick takes Nova to visit his sister Maggie and spends time with her. On their way back, Nick tells Nova that they'll be home soon. He pulls the car over to the side and turns it off. Both are worried because Nick's father saw them together. Nova says, "Your dad won't let us stay together, and maybe this will be our last night." Hearing this, Nick kisses her, and they lose control of their emotions. Later, they go to the beach, trying to make the moment beautiful and memorable. They spend the whole night together. The next morning, Nick tells Nova, "Let's run away far from here," but Nova refuses and says, "My mom finally has a good life after so many years. I can't hurt her." On their way back, Nick stops the car at a store to buy something. Meanwhile, Ronnie arrives, knocks Nova unconscious, and kidnaps her. When Nick returns, he sees that Nova is not in the car. He immediately realizes that she has been kidnapped and contacts the police. The police check the CCTV footage, and Nick identifies that the kidnapper is Ronnie. Nova is taken to a secret location, and it is revealed that it was actually her father, Jonas, who arranged the kidnapping. Jonas calls Nova's mother and demands 10 million rupees, telling her that if she wants Nova back alive, she must deliver the money by 4 p.m. the next day at a specific location. Nick's father agrees to give the money. The police, along with Nick's parents, set up a plan and reach the designated location. The police are undercover, but Jonas has set up a hidden camera to monitor their every move. At the same time, Nick and a female police officer are in a car. Nick remembers that the car Ronnie used to kidnap Nova had a tracker installed due to insurance, and with this information, the police are able to trace the car's location. When Jonas realizes that the police have traced him, he forces Nova to drive the car and tries to escape. Nick follows them and finally reaches a point where Nova stops the car. Jonas orders Nova to drive the car at gunpoint. Nick's and Nova's cars come face to face. As their cars get closer, both Nick and Nova apply the handbrakes and lean forward. At that moment, the female police officer with Nick shoots Jonas, killing him instantly. Nova's mother is overjoyed to find her daughter safe and sound. At the end of the story, we see Nick secretly entering Nova's room and hugging her. Both are happy together and never avoid being close to each other. However, Nick and Nova's parents decide that they must end their relationship in some way. And that's how the story ends. If you like the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. See you in the next video.